to Knowledge Frontiers. I'm Dave Kelly, and my guest today is Dr. Erika Holland, an assistant professor of biological sciences. Thank you, Erika, for joining us.
Thanks for having me, David. I'm pretty excited to talk about the research today.
Well, that's great, because we are going to talk about the research grant you've been working on with the National Institutes of Health. And this involves a study of the toxicants in our environment and ultimately what impact those toxicants may have on human health. However, your subjects in this test, or your test subjects, are not actually humans. They're zebrafish. And we'll talk more specifically about the zebrafish in just a moment. But before we do that, could you please give us an overview of what your research project is all about?
Yeah, so we work with the adult zebrafish as well as some really young zebrafish, so embryos, which are right after they're fertilized, and then also larvae, which are whenever they've hatched. And what we do is we expose them to chemicals that we know from previous research alter cellular calcium and are associated with neurotoxicity. And what we're looking for after we expose them are things like changes in behavior, like anxiety or lethargic or hyperactive activity, or things in like change in heartbeat, and also things such as changes in blood glucose levels. And where you might notice, obviously, that the heart and blood glucose are not exactly related to neurons, but chemicals that alter calcium can lead to a lot of different changes in the body. And we want to try to get a holistic view of that. And it's kind of fun. We can work with these embryo in kind of a recording studio type of thing. Nowadays, we have these little boxes where you can record many of them at one time and look for things like they're swimming. Then you can also just put these guys under a microscope. They're clear when they're really young, and you can count their heart rate really easily.
Now let's talk for a moment about the zebrafish species. Why is the zebrafish species an appropriate test subject species for this particular study? What makes them appropriate for this?
Yeah, so the really great thing about zebrafish is that they actually can represent both humans and other fish species. So fish in general share about 70% genetic information with humans. And the zebrafish in particular has been accepted by NIH as a really good model for humans because we know so much about them, which is different than a lot of other fish species where there just hasn't been as many studies. And the zebrafish, as I kind of mentioned, they're clear whenever they're really young, and that makes it really easy to do a lot of different things in physiology. And we can actually get a lot of different eggs from the zebrafish. They're really easy to breed in a lab. And having large amounts of eggs to work with give us a lot of ability to run large experiments. And then it also allows us to therefore have a lot of confidence in our research because we're running it over and over and over again, which is hard to do with other fish.
Maybe we should clarify some additional details about the zebrafish. I know that they're roughly about 2 to 3 inches long at maximum maturity. And you were telling me that they live about 2 years?
Yeah, that's correct.
Approximately. And how many eggs would they produce in that amount of time?
Let's just talk about one breeding cycle, I guess. We can make them a pair, which is a male and 2 females. We can make them breed every 2 weeks approximately. And whenever they do breed, that's about 200 eggs per pair. So we can run, for example, 10 pairs at one time and get upwards of 2,000 eggs if we need to.
Yeah, that's a lot of eggs to work with and a lot of sample material. So that does make them an ideal species for this. So as we talk about some of these toxicants that you're studying, I know that the term PCB or polychlorinated biphenyls comes up a lot. Yeah. And so where would we typically find in our everyday life, where would we find the PCBs, and why are they so much of a concern in this particular study?
Yeah, it's a really good question, where PCBs actually were used pretty heavily in the early part of the 1900s, but then they were banned in 1970s when a lot of the water and air regulations came on board. But before those regulations, a lot of the PCBs were dumped into the environment in really large amounts. And so they're one of the major concerns across the globe still, even though they were banned over 40 years ago. And they can actually be in every type of environmental situation. So they're present in the air that we breathe. A lot of attention has been paid to levels in schools where if schools were built during a certain time, they have a lot of the PCBs. And for the PCBs, basically, we know that in human populations that are exposed to PCBs, that they're associated with such things as cancer, as well as altered learning and behavior. And we know kind of more in like rat studies that it's highly correlated with things like altered development. And so we really focus on these. We don't know exactly how they're causing altered neurodevelopment, but we do know that it's probably related to altered calcium inside of neurons.
And that's the next question I had about neurotoxicants, because that's what we're talking about here is toxic materials or toxic chemicals that interfere with neural development. And you mentioned calcium. Calcium levels are very important in neural development. Why is it that calcium levels are so important? What role do they play? And how do neurotoxicants such as PCBs disrupt that? And why is that a concern? And how is your study addressing that?
Yeah, so it's a great question, because most of the time when people think of calcium, they automatically go to bone health. And calcium actually is involved in every single cell in the body in a lot of different ways. So for example, it's important for your muscles, your heart, and of course your neurons, as you mentioned. And for example, one of the things that they do is they work with proteins. So proteins often have a function because they bind to calcium or they interact with calcium. And that's going to cause things like muscle contraction. And in neurons in particular, what they do is they, in development, they make sure that one neuron is connected appropriately to its neighboring neurons. And so you might imagine if as you're developing, you have altered connections between your neighbors, that can lead to problems in communication. And so that's the main way in which calcium can lead to neurodevelopment. And we know that if species are exposed to things like PCBs early, like rats, that can lead to these altered connections whenever you kind of look at their brain to see how neurons are interacting.
I know we're starting to run out of time here with this interview, but I want to get to the main point here, which is a tool that you're developing through all of this research. This tool will help in the identification of these toxicants and the danger levels that they present. So if you could wrap up by telling us about the tool that you're developing, how is that going to work?
Yeah, so it's actually two tools. So the zebrafish, and then we're also developing a cell. And the cell is just easy to work with because a cell is, you can run a lot of experience, even more than a fish with a cell. And what you can do with the cell actually is if they are exposed to something that alters calcium, they will glow. And that's a really easy way to show that that's changed. Versus if it's not altering calcium, you don't see that change in light. And so it's a really easy way to kind of go through a lot of chemicals at one time. And then the zebrafish is going to be used then to confirm what we see in the cell. Well, obviously, a cell is not the same as a whole animal that has things like livers to help them deal with chemicals. And so we're really hoping that this will allow us to kind of remove some of those chemicals that are a problem before they actually get into things like consumer products or put out into the air from industries, for example.
Thank you, Erika. We have run out of time. I want to, again, express my appreciation for your being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
And thank you to the audience for joining us for this edition of Knowledge Frontiers.
We are Lions. We bring hope where it's needed. Support causes that matter. Change lives. Change communities. Change the world. Visit lionsclubs.org to learn more.
Hello and welcome to Knowledge Frontiers. I'm Dave Kelly, and my guest today is Dr. Melawhy Garcia. Dr. Garcia is an assistant professor in the Department of Health Science, and she is also the director of the Center for Latino Community Health, Evaluation, and Leadership Training. Thank you, Melawhy, for being here today on the show.
Yes, thank you for having me. Very excited to be here.
Well, let's get started. You've been working on a grant that is involved in studying barriers to diabetes treatment and disease management within the Latino community. So could you start out by giving us an outline of the essence of this research?
Yes, definitely. So my focus is type 2 diabetes management among Latino adults, primarily in California. I look to identify modifiable factors that can be developed in an intervention to then make sure that we teach Latinos how to effectively manage their diabetes through the different behaviors that need to happen.
And have you noticed that there are any barriers, any cultural barriers to treatment of diabetes and disease management within the Latino community? And if so, are those barriers because of any cultural issues of various kinds?
Definitely. So there is definitely cultural barriers, but one step back is definitely there's multi-level factors that influence management among Latinos, starting with individual factors, which can be something like knowledge about their condition, knowledge about diet and physical activity. Then there is cultural barriers such as traditional diet, the ingredients that we usually cook with in Latino families. But then there's also structural barriers that play a big role, such as access to care, and when people are receiving care, the type of care that they receive, like culturally competent care or care that is driven by someone who understands the Latino culture.
And do you feel that the Latino community is suffering disproportionately or not because of some of these cultural barriers?
Latinos definitely have disproportionate rates of type 2 diabetes. National data shows about 12%. If you look at data from the largest Latino study, which is the Hispanic Community Health Study of Latinos, we see that those rates are actually closer to 17 or 18%. And definitely cultural barriers will play a role. But like I said, it is multi-level barriers that will, in the end, influence the onset of diabetes.
Well, how can we overcome or surmount these obstacles or barriers to disease management when we're talking about diabetes too? Would technology and technology applications possibly play a role in this overcoming of problems that we see today?
Definitely. So, like I said, we have to intervene at different levels. So, as far as individual level, we have to make sure people have awareness, that people know about the condition. A lot of those that have type 2 diabetes are undiagnosed or they're already at the pre-diabetes stage. So, definitely being aware of the condition, making sure that people are being screened, making sure that they know about healthy diets and how that can lead to chronic conditions. And there is barriers to participating in traditional education programs or diet counseling. So using things like technology, electronic health records, telemedicine definitely can play a role because it will reduce barriers to actually participating in awareness education type classes.
Well, let's talk about obesity for a moment, because we know that obesity is often linked with diabetes too. And if we can control diet, you've been talking about diet already, but if we can control diet and we can prevent the onset of of obesity, we also have a better chance of controlling diabetes or keeping it at bay or preventing it from starting in the first place. So, what are your thoughts about obesity and how we can control, contain, and hopefully prevent diabetes from expanding into the Latino community more than it is there now?
Yeah, definitely. Unfortunately, Latinos also have high rates of obesity, both for children and adults. So, like I said, it really requires culturally competent counseling, nutrition counseling. Currently, there's actually a lack of bilingual dietitians who can provide care and guidance for Latinos. So, definitely increasing the workforce that's culturally competent, that's bilingual, that understands the culture would be one. And like I said, being able to get them to programs, being able to access care through telemedicine, social media, or awareness campaigns that can reach people out in the community. Because unfortunately, Latinos don't have a lot of time to enroll in studies, to attend classes. You know, they're working. And especially now with COVID, I think things have been very restricted. There's very little that we can do out in the community right now to raise awareness about obesity.
And if we're talking about diet and dietary changes, are we really talking about wholesale changes in diet, or are there things that are less extreme than wholesale changes that can be done that would be tremendously helpful?
Right. So it is recommended to make small changes. So small changes, for example, to ingredients, knowing the right portion of the things that you are eating. For example, one of the staples is tortillas. They come in different sizes. So for people to be aware of, okay, how many should I be eating if they're this size, and what is my correct serving, is a way that we can definitely try to curb obesity, and just really making people aware of the importance of vegetables and fruits, and maybe lowering carbs, and also the importance of reducing sugar-sweetened beverages among children and adults.
Sounds like good advice for all of us. We should all be mindful of what we're eating and excess sugar and so forth. Also, want to ask you about the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. You did mention that a moment ago. How has the COVID-19 pandemic interfered with or complicated your efforts in trying to both get the word out and actually get some implementation of better management of diabetes too in the Latino community?
Yeah, I have definitely been impacted, as many others at Cal State Long Beach. I had a current study with the Children's Clinic, a large federally qualified health center. We were in the planning stages to implement focus groups to talk with groups of Latino adults to find out, what it is they would want to see in an intervention. We actually were not able to carry those out because there's restrictions to recruiting and working with community members. So now we'll have to be trying to go to like a virtual type focus group to make sure that we can get people at the table, but definitely recruitment is something that has slowed. And unfortunately, this is really, COVID is also leading to food insecurity among the Latino community, which is definitely increasing the rates of, the bad foods that people are eating because they don't have the work and funds able to provide, healthy food to their families.
So it is a complicating factor, no doubt. But assuming we can get beyond the pandemic in the near future, hopefully the near future, how will you know when we're making progress, and when will we be, and how will you know that we're starting to see significant light at the end of the tunnel with this effort?
Based on my knowledge in Long Beach, there is very little programs. So I think first starting off with the development of programs that people can access that are in their language, that are culturally tailored. After that, I think we have to really monitor change over time. It's easy to increase someone's knowledge about diet and physical activity, but it's a little bit harder to maintain change and maintain sugar levels under control. So I think it does require monitoring long-term to see that there is improvement overall.
Well, we've run out of time, unfortunately, for this segment, but I want to thank you, Dr. Melawhy Garcia, for being here today on Knowledge Frontiers.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to the audience for staying with us.
Unused prescription opioid pain medicines can spell risk if they're taken by someone they weren't prescribed for, or harm if accidentally taken by a child or a pet. Safely dispose of opioids before they can hurt your family. Find a drug take-back option such as medicine drop-off boxes. If there isn't one available, check the FDA's flush list. If your medicine isn't on the flush list, you can dispose of it in the trash. Get information to keep your family safe.
Hello and welcome to Knowledge Frontiers. I'm Dave Kelly. My guest today is Dr. Shailesh Chandra. Dr. Chandra is an associate professor of civil engineering and construction engineering management. Welcome, Dr. Chandra, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dave, for the invitation. I'm glad to be here.
Well, let's talk about a grant that you've been involved with Caltrans. And the grant is a study that will look into the possibility of implementation of what's known as a road usage charge, also known as RUC. Now, the road usage charge would, as the name implies, charge people for use of the highways. And so it would be a per mile charge on every car that uses the freeway. And this would be as a supplement to the gas taxes that we currently have at the gas pump, and would also be an alternative to raising the gas taxes again in the future. So why don't we start by having you give us some understanding of the parameters of the research and what is the essence of that research?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And this is a very important issue currently for Caltrans, especially when they're looking into funding of transportation infrastructure. There was a white paper that we worked on with regards to road user charge in California. And we looked at a variety of issues, challenges, current practices, and research gaps that exist in today's time. So this research was basically 2 years ago, but we still have remnants of the research, and we are still doing a continued work in this area. And we looked at road charge collection and enforcement, a reporting system for vehicle miles traveled, privacy issues, then how to integrate and interact with a point of scale at the endpoint where this road charge could be accepted or used or purchased by the user. So there are different angles that we looked at, and we finally provided some ideas and some analysis that we did for each of the different factors that we looked at to Caltrans and help them make a better decision in future with regards to the road usage charge implementation.
So if they do implement the road usage charge, which is again a per mile fee for cars using the roads and highways, how would that actually work? And how would it be better than just raising the gas tax in the future?
Yeah, and this is one of the very important questions, probably that's been raised by general public as well. Especially when it comes to the domain and when they have to pay the fee ultimately. So in recent times, electric vehicles and fuel-efficient vehicles have increased tremendously on the roads, and even the existing, gasoline-run vehicles. In the past, they were like not giving that great mileage, but their fuel efficiency has gone up way up in terms of miles per gallon that they yield. So that has improved all the time. At the same time, the funding for infrastructure, for transportation infrastructure, basically comes from a portion of a gas tax that people, unknowingly or knowingly pay when they fuel, the vehicle at the pump stations. So that portion will kind of declining, and the reason is that people are visiting not that frequently these gas stations. So they, for the same gallon of gas, their car is running several miles now, and that was not the thing in the past. So this also means that there is a shrinking revenue for the state in terms of funding this infrastructure. So all of these factors, they'll continue to kind of stress out the funding mechanism that should have been more sustainable in reality, but it's not because of these variety of reasons. So road user charge, on the other hand, is you pay for each mile you drive. So that means independent of how much how efficient your vehicle is, the more it drives on the road, the more it has to pay, and that's a fair amount. That's basically fairly, charging a vehicle, rather than assuming that gas tax would just pay for everything. So this is road user charge is much more sustainable. Basically, all that it means in the long run. And this is less of a burden for the state to manage funds for funding its infrastructure in times to come.
Yeah, basically what you're saying is that because of the vehicles that have much greater fuel efficiency and even the introduction of more electrical vehicles and fuel cell vehicles and so on, the fuel tax isn't going to keep up, even though the mileage will continue to go up. And so really the only way to assess taxation for the roads would appear to be that mileage usage, because that's what seems to make the most sense. I know that they've already implemented this in Oregon, the state of Oregon. And how does it work there? And is it raising sufficient revenue based on expectations? And has it been embraced and accepted by the public there in the state of Oregon?
Yeah, Oregon is a very good example in pioneering implementation of road user charge in the state. One of the things, and in fact, Oregon was one of the first states in the country which conducted a pilot program, and they found it to be successful amongst the volunteers for this, who subscribed to this road user charge. So now it's fully operational there, and the general public has a choice, have a choice to subscribe to it and test it out. So right now, the way it appears is people who are already subscribed to it, they like it, compared to those who are not part of it yet. There has been a success, yeah, in Oregon for sure, but it is limited to only those drivers who understand it. So right now there are challenges in the state itself and everywhere else in the country as well, in trying to educate the public and to generate awareness regarding the sustainability of like funding the infrastructure of their own, let's say local community and so on through this road user charge. So it still has its own challenges, and it has to be embraced by people at large in terms of how many are going to subscribe to it. So this has to be in Oregon, especially, I think it's successful in some sense, but at the same time, it's not so successful because not many have subscribed to it yet.
Okay, and as we're looking at other states, Utah is also involved in pilot programs with California in this effort. So is this something that's going to spread nationally, or is it more likely to be most effective in the western states and southwestern states where we have a lot of miles to maintain?
Well, sooner or later, all the states are going to realize that this is the way to go. And the reason is, as I said, first of all the vehicles are becoming more fuel efficient. And the second reason is that states themselves are passing legislation in terms of increasing the registration fees for those electric vehicles now, especially in Oregon and even in California. They are about to, kind of pass legislation where electric vehicles have to pay higher registration fees right at the beginning, and they can avoid this fee if they are subscribed to this road user charge program. And that will kind of also convince the public to accept or embrace this method of payment for the infrastructure that they're using. For states, sometimes, especially in California, and they have raised, through Senate Bill 1, they have raised the gas tax, a portion of it that comes to the state. And somehow they have avoided implementation of road user charge in the state for another 10 years or so. So, but that will again subside, or that will, thin out as we kind of progress and as more and more vehicles are using less amount of fuel. So sooner or later, you will see that, most states, and this has to be a collaboration among the states as well, especially those vehicles which travel from one state to another state. And there has to be some, synchronization between the two states, how the payments are done and collected. So yes, I would believe in a time to come, road user charge is one of the very effective and sustainable methods of generating funds and revenue for the funding of infrastructure.
All right, well, unfortunately, we've run out of time for this particular segment, but I want to thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Dave, for having me on. Thank you very much.
And thank you to the audience for staying with us on Knowledge Frontiers.